Emil Guillermo. That's me, Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok. We haven't mentioned it yet, but now that I've mentioned it, now it's the aforementioned Emil Amok's takeout. That Emil Amok. How are you? We're here Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific Live. And if you're checking your watch, you know, hey, Emil, you're here at 1:52 Pacific. You're so generous today. You're giving us something extra. Yes, the Lanyap section is starting up, giving you something extra. Because some people come exactly at 2. It's like appointment listening. And some people are just sort of tooling around on the internet saying, well, what is this thing, Emil Amok? Emil Amok, I've heard of this guy, or I saw him a long time ago. I mean, he used to be on that NBC affiliate in San Francisco. Oh, he used to do something in Washington. Oh, I heard the name. Wasn't he indicted for? No, he wasn't. That wasn't, no, not me. Emil Amok, Emil Guillermo, the micro talk show, the AAPI and the AAXs, and AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander. The AAX is Asian American, and you can just throw in your ethnicity. I mean, if you're a native Hawaiian, you can be an Asian American native Hawaiian, or an Asian American at the NH, or just an Asian American Hmong. I like to say the Hmong because they're AAHs. They're the ahas. They're the feel-good Asians. And they got Suni Lee. You know, because we need a naming convention for all of us under this big tent, this big umbrella. And if you're none of these Asian groups in our 21, 23 million or so in the United States, then you're just a member of the ALLs, you know, all's the rest of you, which is good because we do this in English. Everything we do, everything we talk about is applicable, relatable to you. And so it's just reversed, you know, like when Asian Americans watch the news, we look for the Asian parts. When Asian Americans look at the news, we look for the things that might apply to us because we don't see ourselves. And now this is kind of like the positive of ethnic media, or media that has an ethnic centric focus, because if you're not of that ethnicity, you see that everything involves you and us. But why does it often take a translator to read the New York Times or the Washington Post and say, oh, this is how it applies to us? Because rarely are we seen, rarely are we heard. That's why we have Emil Amok's Takeout. My takes on all things considerable. I've been a talk show host. I've been a real news guy who went out with his notepad and came back and wrote the story all by my lonesome. I've been a newspaper reporter, newspaper columnist. I've been a print journalist. I guess that's what the aforementioned was. I was the host of All Things Considered for a while. I was on TV. I did some anchoring. I did some field reporting. When I felt like, hey, I can get this suit dirty. Let me go out in the field. But now in my advanced age, talking about the news and giving you a perspective might be maybe slightly more valuable. I give you the information and I give you a way to think about it. I don't tell you how to think. I mean, you can think for yourself, clearly. But I tell you a perspective that you won't, that might make you say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. I mean, I hope not, but I know there are people out there who say, well, you know, I didn't really think that there was an Asian American perspective. I just thought there was a perspective, a white perspective. So that's why we do this show. And we talk all about just the top stories of the day. And then you could read my columns on ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund website, ALDEF, aaldef.org/blog. Also, my columns appear elsewhere: Diverse Issues in Higher Education, the Open Post, the Inquirer.net for Filipinos worldwide, the Global Filipino Network. And I've been writing this column for over 25 years. And for the last 11 at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. But for the longest time, for 15 years, it was on the now defunct Asian Week. Now you can find it in Hawaii at the Hawaii Filipino Chronicle. So we're offshore, mainland, everywhere. And this show, the purpose of this show is to talk about the things from our perspective, because you might miss it. And I want to talk about Biden and his Omicron war. It's important. It's an important Omicron. Actually, let me just go into the Omicron war first. Because if you're not vaccinated, you are not willingly going into the Omicron war. And why aren't you? Because if you're not going into the Omicron war with a vaccine, brother, sister, you're going to war without a gun. And you know how valuable those are, right? I don't want to appear anti-gun. I am, but But, if you're going to fight this war against the virus, if you're going to fight the war against Omicron, COVID, Delta, all the variants, you got to be locked and loaded with that vaccine. And if you're not, well, you don't want to waste your Second Amendment, do you? For goodness sakes, go get vaccinated. We got to get up to that 80% level to get the full effect of all the vaccines and the boosters. So if you haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated. Get your gun in the COVID war. We're fighting Omicron now. Like I said, you wouldn't go to war without your gun, would you? And really, the reason why a show like this exists is because we're the balance. We give you the information. Go out and get your vaccine. Go out and get your booster. If you got your vaccine before June, you qualify. Get your booster. Everyone go out and get your booster. And there's even a text. Joe Biden today said you can text a number and you can find out, where the closest location. Text 43829. 43829. Booster now, I guess, is what it is. And they'll tell you, put in your zip code, 43829, and you find out where you get your booster. It's free. Go get your Omicron gun. That's what it is. It's an Omicron gun. Don't believe it? It is. I mean, that's the only way you're going to get those non-vaccinated people and the non-booster people to go out and get their vaccine. See, it's like getting a gun. You don't want to go to war without a gun. So go out and get it. All right, so there, I'm pro-gun. Just briefly. Because Biden in his speech today, he gave another speech, a second speech before the nation. He said, this is patriotic. We're going to war. He could have been a little more forceful. He could have said, not just people coming in have to show their vaccine results, but, they got to show proof and they got maybe a recent test. You should have had everyone flying, period. Everyone flying, showing their vaccinations or their boosters. And that is a kind of incentive that would get everyone on board, because we are on this, got to be on board to fight this fight. You want to be patriotic? It's not being patriotic about your choice. There's no choice in this war. The choice is you got to get a gun to fight this vaccine. And the vaccine is called, to fight this virus. And the gun is called a vaccine. Okay, maybe that'll sink in with some people. All right, here's it's 2:01 Pacific. The show officially begins. I want to talk about Hana. Not Hannah. Hana. This is significant. And I was watching a local Detroit station's report, and a local anchor, and look, I can relate to local anchors. Hi, this is local anchor. Hana, poor Hana. And, it's not his fault. He's actually very gracious. When the field reporter, who just talked to Hana's parents, said, hey, listen here, buddy anchor. The name is not Hana. It's Hana. Hana. A little respect for the dead. And when I saw the reporter do that, I mean, to his credit, he stood up to the anchor. Anchor backed down immediately. Said, yeah, we got to pronounce the names right. I related immediately, too. All those times when people like Jane Pauley and other people would mispronounce my name on the air. Emil Guillermo. They just butchered it. They want to say Guillermo, which is the Spanish way when you order a burrito. But I pronounce it Guillermo, which is a more of a rolly L, double L sound, which is the way the Filipinos, say the double L when they eat their halo halo, which is a single L. Halo, halo, single L. 2 words. So 2 L's there, but individual. So I'm sensitive when someone mispronounces my name or a name, especially since the reason I do it is because I want to honor the Filipinos. I want to honor the Asians. I don't want to honor the colonizers, the Spanish who say Guillermo. And I don't want to honor the Americanized who say Mr. Guillermo. No, and I'm not Mr. Guillermo. I'm sorry. I'm Emil Guillermo. So, Hana is a big deal. If you've ever been in Maui, in Hawaii, you know how big a deal Hana is. It's a hell of a drive, and it's worth it when you get there. So beautiful and peaceful. Hana. So Hana, St. Juliana, 14 years old, lived in Oxford, a town that was 90% white. And she stuck out. She stuck out because she was a great volleyball player and a great basketball player. And at 14, she was making an impact on all the teams there in her little town of Oxford. She was supposed to debut her basketball skills this week. I don't know Hana from Oxford High. I just know that she wasn't Hannah, she was Hana. And it meant to me, when I saw her picture, she was indeed Asian American. You want to talk about relatability, right? I related by name. I related when I saw her. I never met Hana, but the moment I saw her, I said, she could have been my daughter. 14, sports star. There I was. I was the soccer coach for my kids. I could relate to her life at this moment. And then to read and see the news, how she was just in the hallway when Ethan Crumbly was coming out of the bathroom, going out in the hall after he'd been talked to by the counselors, by his parents who were there. This is why the prosecutor thinks it was all premeditated, because after the meetings, he was decided he can go back to school, go back to class after being hauled in, his parents hauled in, being talked to for just his strange, depressive behavior. And maybe they should have taken it more seriously. But they didn't. Ethan Crumley went out, started firing, apparently not targeting anyone, although he got some significant people just out in the hall. Successful scholarship kids, football star, another young man. Well, he there's still at least more than a half dozen in the hospital. And then Hana, 14 years old. I saw the report last night on local Detroit television, and the reporter just said he tried to talk to Hana's parents, and they couldn't talk. They deferred to their close friends and neighbors who knew Hana like she was their own. And they talked and spoke glowingly about this 14-year-old girl with her future in front of her, now her life taken away. And as I said, I just saw her and I knew. I mean, I don't know the parents. Don't know the parents' background. St. Juliana, I don't know the derivation of the ethnicity of that name. But Hana, and to see the reporter correct the anchor to say it's not Hannah, it's Hana, indicating some Asian ethnicity as part, and we all know that the number of half Asians, multi-race Asians, is a huge number in our population. And I just saw her face and I said, I know, I've contributed to that. Hana could have been my daughter. So, you know, these stories, every time you see a shooting, you just hold your breath. And when you're Asian American, it used to be that you could pretty much be assured that Asian Americans weren't involved. It used to be. But now, especially with the Stop AAPI hate and with the pandemic scapegoating, 10,000 instances of anti-Asian American hate, that's not always true. And then you have a school shooting. And I have to say this. I mean, they were very, very tight-lipped about IDs and about, you know, who was, you know, who the victims were and the names. They didn't even want to name Crumley, the suspect, the 15-year-old suspect, because they didn't want to give him any play. And then they show the victims, the 4 victims, and Hana is one of them. And you see her that she's the youngest, 14, and you just say, your heart sinks. And like I said, your heart sinks no matter what ethnicity they are. But just knowing she's part Asian American, it just gets you. There but for fortune. One of those there but for fortune moments. So, I don't know what's going to happen to Crumley, Ethan Crumley. His parents apparently bought that gun 4 days before the incident, and they could be charged fairly quickly. I mean, it could happen today. But there will be memorials. There will be, I mean, all these stories have the same kind of rhythm and process. But every time it happens, it doesn't just affect the community. Every time we see some of these mass tragedies, and I would include all the shootings together, but I would also include Waukesha, where someone drove into a parade with an SUV. I would include all these acts of violence as a form of trauma that we all feel at some point. It's like these concentric circles of pain. Of course, the closer you are, the more you feel it. And the further away, maybe you can keep a stiff upper lip and just move on. But it gets harder and harder the more of these you see. And every time you see an Asian American. I mean, when I mentioned this yesterday on show number 191, Hana's identity wasn't known at that point. And it wasn't until later on that I saw. So we'll be following this, thinking about it, I think it's just, you think about the youth, you think about young kids, you think about your own kids, you think about parenting, you think about how a community responds. And in a tight-knit community like Oxford, like I said, 90% white, it's a small town. And they're kind of isolated. And no one mentions her Asianness, I'm sure. I mean, they just see it. They just accept her. But to have her taken away like this, it's painful. And it's traumatic. And I just know that a lot of this coincides with my being a meditator now. And that's helped. But it is no small thing to seek help if you are feeling traumatized from just this news, no matter how close or how far you are. And there's no shame attached to feeling somewhat out of sorts, distressed, sad, because there'll be another killing, there'll be another shooting in a school, that we need to do something. We said this after Parkland, we said this after Sandy Hook, we said this after El Paso, after Dayton, go to my ALDEF blog, aaldf.org/blog. I've written about shootings, not just in school, but just shootings and mass shootings in general. And this is part of the trauma of being an American. I think that's one of the saddest things. So keep Hana in your prayers, and when you see someone say her name is Hana, gently correct them and say, it's Hana, like Maui, like the drive to Hana. So I talked about the Supreme Court yesterday, and I talked about what's at stake. It looks like the court is going to brew over this Mississippi case. Mississippi wants to ban abortions after 15 weeks, no exceptions. It's a real backwards kind of law. If you think that Roe v. Wade is the law, is settled law, has been for 50 years, was reaffirmed 30 years ago with Casey. And if you think precedent is the way the court should be, well, then we should honor the precedents. And I know that Asian Americans, based on the latest ALDEF poll, the ALDEF exit poll, which was taken just this past election, 60% of Asian Americans believe in Roe v. Wade and the right of a woman's right to abortion. So it should be a slam dunk, right? That we should preserve that. But no, we have a 6-3 court, conservative, and it looks like the conservatives are going to make this a political issue. The one thing that I heard, if it's going to be a political issue, and we might as well, I mean, there's two things. You can cross your fingers and hope that there's some kind of compromise in the court and that Roberts sort of can reel in some of his conservatives. But it looks pretty futile at 6-3. The best thing I heard today is that Representative Judy Chu, an Asian American from Southern California, San Gabriel Valley, Democrat, is putting forth a bill to preserve women's reproductive rights. And that's the bill that people will have to get behind if they want to support women's right to choose in America, because it's going to have to be codified into law. It's going to have to go to Congress. It's going to have to go through the fights in the House. The votes are there in the House now. Will it get through the Senate? You think it's hard to pass a budget? How hard do you think it is to get a legislative version of Roe v. Wade? So it's going to be tough no matter what. But that's, if you can say, go past the court and say, okay, the court is not going to be the answer. And this is the thing that really scared me when I heard Kavanaugh yesterday. Now listen to Kavanaugh. He's talking to the Mississippi Solicitor General, and this is his statement. Oop. I gotta change my plug here. So here's Kavanaugh talking to the Solicitor General.
And to be clear, you're not arguing that the court somehow has the authority to itself prohibit abortion, or that this court has the authority to order the states to prohibit abortion, as I understand it, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And as I understand it, you're arguing that the Constitution's silent and therefore neutral on the question of abortion. In other words, that the Constitution's neither pro-life nor pro-choice on the question of abortion, but leaves the issue for the people of the states or perhaps Congress to resolve in the democratic process. Is that accurate?
Right. We're saying it's left to the people, Your Honor.
So that should tell you the strategy. That was the initial strategy, or that's the new strategy now that Mississippi discovered that, oh, there are 6 conservatives on the court. The only thing that's changed is the 6 conservatives. But before, they were willing, as long as Ruth Bader Ginsburg was there, who was going to hold up Roe, they were willing to let their case, which they've been fighting over since 2018. They're willing to just say, look, we just want to show that this is what our state wants. But they weren't looking to the court to try to reverse it. Now they've got the 6 votes. Now it's political. And now the liberals are saying, boy, this is the political stench we don't want on the court. Don't we worry about precedents? Don't we worry about democracy? And here's Kavanaugh saying, now, you're just saying, Mississippi, that Constitution is neutral. Constitution has no business ruling on abortion. Yep, that's right. It's all up to the states. And that's why you got to get ready for the fact that with the 6-3 vote, 6 conservatives, that there's going to be a legislative fight, and the fight isn't over. It's going to be ongoing. It's going to be one of those eternal, perpetual fights. And it'll be up to the voters ultimately to elect the right people who elect the right, or who select the right judges and do the right thing for the people. Because now we have the conservatives playing politics on the Supreme Court. And already California is preparing to be the state where people will come to get their abortions. Come see the Golden Gate Bridge. And here's a free coupon to our gynecological services. I mean, they are making way for an abortion industry in California. And that should really upset the right, but they forced it. Because where are people from around the country going to go? I mean, I guess they'll go to other places that are abortion friendly. But that's a big issue yet to come. But it looks like the court probably could decide by June or July. Already the wheels are in motion for the alternatives, because politics isn't like giving birth. You got to plan for some things. And the planning is, okay, here's a legislative answer. I don't know if there really is an answer in the judicial system yet, unless collectively as a people we select or elect the right people president. A couple more items I want to talk about. I talked about this yesterday briefly. December 1st was the deadline for Major League Baseball to decide whether or not they were going to have a lockout or whether or not they were going to continue negotiating. Nothing was solved. December 1st came and went, or actually the deadline came and went. We're in December 1st now. And so now the players are locked out. It's not a strike technically, it's a lockout. We've had them in 89, we've had them in 94. And each time disastrous, each time made people hate baseball. Each time baseball couldn't recover. And baseball had such a good year in COVID. COVID, when fans were back in the ballpark, it really, I think it helped rally some communities. I mean, in the San Francisco Bay Area, I know that made me like the Giants more. I mean, they're not a lousy team this year. After all, they're actually pretty good. No, I got into the Giants. And now, as I said yesterday, well, the Giants didn't sign all their key players that I thought they should keep, like, someone like Chris Bryant. You need a top ticket guy, especially if you lose Posey. You need a top ticket. Right now, the top ticket guys have had peak veteran years, like Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford. The chances of them duplicating that are not great, but they'll probably slightly dip. So you need a big ticket guy who's going to anchor that team. Posey had a great year last year, so chances are he wasn't going to be tip top. They lost their all-star pitcher Kevin Gausman to free agency. So I don't know how I'm going to feel about the Giants again, but who knows if they're going to play again. I just know that baseball can't afford to upset its fans. And when you have big-time free agents at the last minute signing contracts, like Max Scherzer went from the Dodgers to the Mets, and he's making like $40 million plus a year. On the one hand, you say, why are we supporting a labor strike for billionaires or multimillionaires? They may not be billionaires. And the only reason why you could support something like that is if the labor agreement is going to be fair to the top guys, it's only fair if it really protects everyone from the highest to the low. And I know this because when I was a reporter, I wasn't top scale with all the big time white anchors who are making millions. I was down there with the foot soldiers making a modest sum, but they set the floor. And that was good for someone like me. If their ceiling was like into the millions at the time in a 3-network universe, that's what it was. Then the floor for foot soldiers like me was a lot higher. It's gotten a lot worse since the media has gone to hell and it's been divvied up, and the revenues aren't the same. But back then in the 80s, if it was good for the top, it was good for the bottom. The guys at the top can go for as much as they could, but they set the floor. And so one of the arguments is the guys you don't hear about, the guys who are, there's a reason why a journeyman relief pitcher makes $1 million a year. You might say that's excessive, but compared to everyone else, it's a higher floor. And thank God, right? Because he's playing in that game. He's playing in that arena. And so that's one issue. One issue is like, what about all the regular folks? What do they get? How do you take care of them? Another issue is when people can become free agents, and by what standards you decide. Well, free agent can go to arbitration first and then free agency. But baseball is a victim of its own success. It is, I think, something like an $11 billion a year revenue generator. So not a whole lot of sympathy from just regular folks who say to the baseball folks, come on, get it together, guys. Think about the average fan. And I count myself in that league, the average fan, because ticket prices aren't cheap. In fact, I think what they should do, they should give away more free tickets. You say, well, TV's free, right? Well, sort of. You got to buy, rights to games that aren't on cable. You got to see it on the internet. But I think they should give more games free. In person. If you are live in the stands, they have the knothole gang, right, where you stand outside the fence and you can watch. They ought to put every ballpark should have an area where fans are allowed to go free, like a pasture kind of thing, where you sit, like an amphitheater. I think if they did a lot of freebies like that, that would go a long way to making fans know that this isn't just a sport for billionaires. Because as long as there's that perception, multi-millionaires, not billionaires. The billionaires, they do code in Silicon Valley. The multi-millionaires, they play in the baseball stadiums. But if they did something like that, I think they might be able to find a way out of this problem. Okay, I have a couple of things to plug, not for me, but my friend Christina Wong does a one-person show. She's at the New York Theater Workshop. Her show is called Sweatshop Overlord. And if you are not in New York, she's doing it live. But if you're anywhere in the country, they're now streaming a professionally recorded version free. Or not free, for a ticket price. I think it's like $30, which is reasonable considering you can watch it multiple times. You can watch it with several friends. It's worth it if you're in LA or San Francisco and you say, I can't make it to New York. I don't want to fly. All right. York Theater Workshop, which I believe you can look up the internet address. I think it's New York, NY Theater Workshop, nytw.org. Christina Wong's Sweatshop Overlord. In response to COVID, she got together her aunties. They made face masks. She did a one-man show. It's funny. It's a story of the community, a document of the COVID times. And as Christina is fond of saying, it's a period piece. It's a COVID piece that doesn't suck. She's funny. She wrote for Kamal Bell for a while. She's a comedian. She does funny one-man shows. And in the New York Times, good reviews there and in Vulture. So check out Christina Wong. I say that, a plug for a friend. I also want to plug a new movie coming out on Friday that if you're Asian American are concerned about if you're concerned about college admissions and how the pressure of college admissions trickles down to the pressure to get into good high schools. Try Harder, a film by Debbie Lum, is out in theaters, selected theaters in San Francisco, LA, New York. It shows Lowell High School, my alma mater, in its not quite full glory, but it follows around 5 students who are trying to get into the college of their choice. And of course, they're overachievers. They want to go to the best colleges. They want to go, you are with them step by step in this pressure cooker of what it's like to be a senior or junior, right? And go through the application process. I'm going to be speaking to the director later today. And I hope to have it on the Emil Muck's Takeout podcast coming up. So two plugs. And of course, I'm going to be looking out at for the Michigan story to see what happens to Crumley, to see what happens to, I'll see if Hana's parents come forward. So sad. Like I said, trauma. It's a collective trauma. You know, you'll see stories from, until the funerals occur, and they'll happen next week. Chances are, unless they're holding him for some reason, the coroners for evidence or whatnot. But the idea of people seeking help right now, you'll see those stories about the trauma, students going through the trauma. But I think it's just part of being an American right now. This is our trauma. If you're going to school, no matter what level, if you've had an active shooter training, I taught briefly a few years back, actually the year the Parkland incident happened. I was teaching and we went through an active shooter drill, several, and you saw one of the things that happened in Oxford. Some girls, some students were talking about the shooter knocking on the door. They didn't open the door. It's one of the things you learn not to do when you go through an active shooter training. But talk about the trauma that those kids have gone through. Being in the room and then hearing the knock on the door and then texting their parents, "I love you. This is happening. I love you." Life in America. Hey, if you've gotten this far in our show, you know this is where I get kind of meditaty. And I just say, look, if you're feeling depressed or sad or somehow unworthy or inadequate or somehow that you don't belong or somehow, if you made it this far, you belong. You're here. You've made it. Give yourself an elbow hug. Yeah, one of those. An elbow hug. Hey, listen. As I wish for you, or as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you live with ease. Till next time, Emil Guillermo. Mahal Kita.